Ich bin Lars Müller.
My name is Lars Müller. I'm a designer and publisher here in Zurich. For some 30 years I've been devoting myself to graphic design and publications on this and other topics.
Publikationen zum Thema und anderen Themen. Grafikdesign, kann ich sagen, ist...
Graphic design is not only my profession, it's a passion of mine, because it's not just about the image itself, but also about the ability to appreciate and communicate an image. I believe that the foundation for what the world came to perceive as Swiss style was laid down before World War II. I think it's rather daring and short-sighted to include everything that was created in the 1950s and 60s under that term, because then chocolate and cheese would also need to fall into that category.
Selber bin ich ausgebildet worden von
I received my own training from representatives of that generation who were the epitome of Swiss style. Maybe I need to make one thing clear. The term Swiss style was never really used in Switzerland. That's an outside perspective that the Swiss may have adopted at one point, but the creators of the style would probably insist on it being an international style. That was, after all, the message of this rational, sober, modernist Swiss design.
Des rationalen, sachlichen, modernistischen Schweizer Designs. Swiss style ist in historischen...
According to historic documents, the term Swiss style has been known and applied since the early 1960s.
Bekannt oder verwendet. Ich könnte mir vorstellen, dass es...
I think it might be an American coinage, an abbreviation for a perception that was prevalent in the United States at the time.
Die in der Zeit in den Vereinigten Staaten gemacht wurde und damit eben das zuverlässig schweizerische...
The term implied Swiss reliability, sobriety, rationality, something perhaps a bit boring for Americans.
Im Hinblick auf die, sagen wir mal, die vornehmliche Verwendung und Umsetzung des...
Also, when it came to applying the style to corporate design, there was something conveniently cliched about it. It stood for successful, reliable, consistent Switzerland. I myself most likely encountered the term in the United States in conversation with Massimo Vignelli.
In den Vereinigten Staaten am ehesten begegnet, der damit vielleicht...
He may, in a slightly ironical way, have associated the term with a certain cliché, which, after all, had also helped him along.
Hat noch zu Zeiten, wie in Mailand tätig war, sehr stark...
During his years in Milan, he referenced Switzerland very strongly in his work. In the late 1950s, he pioneered the use of the Helvetica typeface. He may have promoted this Swissness more than others.
Vielleicht stärker kolportiert als andere. Da ich eigentlich...
As I've always been focused on this topic, its relevance to me has never increased or diminished. It was more like an ongoing discussion. I have noticed, however, that the perception of this kind of design, or the interest in it, can go through cycles.
Eben durchaus zyklische Verläufe hat. Ich kann das am besten vielleicht an diesem Beispiel...
Maybe the best example for that is the Helvetica typeface, on which I published a book back in 2002. It's a passion of mine.
Aus ganz persönlicher Leidenschaft. Und damals war das ein rasender Boom.
At that time, this font was a huge success. The whole world was celebrating and using Helvetica. Every party flyer in London was done in Helvetica. Then there was a boom in 2007-2008 when we celebrated the 50th anniversary of Helvetica. With regard to that, I would say there is that cyclical process, periodically placing a special emphasis on this kind of design.
Diese Konjunktur, diese zyklische Kurve, die immer mal wieder diese Gestaltung in den Vordergrund bringt. In den vergangenen vielleicht 10 Jahren.
During the past 10 years, it was sometimes stronger, sometimes less so. If the emphasis is increasing once again, I think it might partly be due to an interest in Swiss design, but it is also an expression of the surfeit of software-driven graphic design.
Software-getriebenen Grafik, die heute durchaus auch jüngere Gestalterinnen und Gestalter.
This has indeed motivated some young designers to return to more basic shapes, or clearer concepts at any rate.
Es ist ja nicht so, dass dem
It doesn't necessarily follow that the polar opposite of sobriety and rationality is experimentation. You must not jump to that conclusion. Looking back at history, we can see that the designers who were pioneers of this movement, or approach in actuality, did quite a bit of experimental work. I imagine, and I can only speak from my own experience, that the rationality and sobriety proves itself in practice. It's a good basis for coping with everyday life and giving yourself some structure, while integrating playful elements into this structure.
In dieser Struktur dann wiederum das Spielerische zu integrieren. Da möchte ich auch gerne hinweisen oder zitieren.
I'd like to point out, or rather quote the title of an exhibition on a related topic, which was called Playfully Rigid.
Spielwitz und Klarheit, wo man sich ja eigentlich den Luxus des Spiels.
You have to be able to afford the luxury of playfulness. And this might be the reason why style and approach are once again becoming increasingly important.
Und das könnte ein Hinweis sein, warum der Stil, die Haltung an Bedeutung und Aufmerksamkeit gewinnt, dass wir nämlich vor lauter Spiel uns
because we have been so busy playing with the countless possibilities of digital design or tools, we may have lost our way.
Des digitalen Designs oder der digitalen Hilfsmittel. Und ich durchaus meine, dass man jetzt, wo wir die Hilfsmittel beherrschen,
I am convinced that now, as we are mastering the tools, it would behoove us to find our way back to a more reliable, more sober, but also more intellectual way of thinking about design.
aber auch intellektuellere Art, Gestaltung zu denken. Das Spiel wird dann schon wieder kommen, aber
The playfulness will come back, and it might even be more authentic than when it was determined by the software. I'm trying to remember conversations with Richard Paul Lohse and Joseph Müller-Brockmann, or with Karl Gerstner, who was a bit younger.
Der etwas jünger war. Es war eigentlich nie die Rede von
At the time, there was no talk of antagonists within the movement. Maybe in ideological terms, but not in physical form. Karl Gerstner once told me how he had danced rock and roll. Lohse didn't do that, nor Müller-Brockmann most likely. In that respect, you might say that the kidney table and rock and roll, or Elvis's Pompadour, were polar opposites in terms of aesthetic and form. I rather think that Swiss design, a rational and sober style of design, somehow satisfied a need, reflecting in a fairly deliberate way the somewhat stuffy reality in our country.
Einem Bedürfnis einer bewussten, ich sage jetzt etwas biederen Wirklichkeit in unserem Land war, die reagieren wollte auf die einerseits auf den zu Ende gegangenen Krieg und
on the one hand, it was meant to be a reaction to the war that had recently ended, and on the other, to the rebuilding of Europe, which needed to be modern. That was absolutely essential. The tradition of Bauhaus and the avant-garde of the pre-war years effectively guaranteed that. I believe that the Swiss style was a reaction to the perception of social circumstances, irrespective of the aesthetic imports of that time.
Importen der Zeit, sage ich mal. man muss auch sehen, was von Zürich ausging.
One needs to bear in mind that what started in Zurich and in Basel too, I don't mean to exclude that, sprang from a solidly Protestant attitude. It's not that somebody just came up with this. There was an urgent need to express yourself in a rational and sober way and to distinguish between individual, personal aesthetic matters of taste and the needs of society.
Und gesellschaftlichen Bedürfnissen. Wenn man Stil mit Haltung in Verbindung bringt, dann glaube ich schon, dass in den 60er Jahren...
If you link style with attitude, then I believe that in the 1960s in particular, there was a commitment to style and indeed a commitment to a certain way of life. People lived the way they designed. They may even have modernized their language.
So gewohnt, wie sie gestaltet haben, oder sie haben vielleicht auch ihre Sprache modernisiert. Ich glaube sehr, oder ich möchte glauben...
I would like to believe that ultimately there is a holistic aspect to this style.
Ein ganzheitlicher Aspekt steckt. Und ich würde mir heute ebenso sehr wünschen, dass
And I would wish that if you commit to a style in this day and age, that you simultaneously raise the question of attitude or commit to an attitude.
Oder sich zu einer Haltung bekennt. Also man könnte da im positiven Sinn durchaus
One positive example I can name is a certain eco-style, which has some likable aspects, even if it is neither very rational nor sober.
Wenn auch nicht sehr rational und nicht sehr sachlich. Ich möchte gerne diesem Revival...
I would like to comment on this revival. I had always wished for it. These books are not meant to be tombs for the Swiss style. They were meant to be memory storage for a time that may, in fact, have come, now that people are devoting their attention to this matter.
Als quasi Erinnerungsspeicher für eine Zeit, die vielleicht jetzt gekommen ist, wo man diese Aufmerksamkeit der Sache widmet. Ich würde mir aber wünschen, dass es eben heute nicht...
I would wish for it not to appear entirely Swiss, but having its origins in Switzerland.
Ursprung hat und heute aber in einer, sagen wir, globalisierten oder globalen Welt oder globalen Betrachtung.
And that nowadays, in a globalized world or a global perception, it may appear to be appropriate for conveying, implementing and illustrating socially relevant contents and issues.
Relevanten Inhalten und Themen. Aber ich habe mit dem Nachdruck der neuen Grafik wahrscheinlich...
By reprinting the journal New Graphic Design, I have made what is probably the movement's most important printed document available again.
Im Sinne auch, dass ich meine, jetzt steht einer...
By that I also mean that now there are no longer any impediments to a proper discussion, because we have the evidence before us. This has been fun for me, but now other people can step in and dedicate themselves to this topic also.
Oft ist ja in der analogen Welt...
In the analog world, it is often sheer quantity that is impressive.
Und was mich jetzt als Verleger und Buchmensch...
As a publisher and book person, I have no problem with that. I have committed myself to that material world. I like it that something manifests as an object, a physical entity, that I can see with my own eyes that New Graphic Design was published over 18 issues, comprising 1,200 pages. If I start reading from the top, I can plough my way through to the last page.
Kämpfe ich mich vielleicht durch bis zur letzten Seite, wo hingegen ein digitales Medium...
But if I were to imagine this in a digital medium, it would remain very abstract.
Sehr abstrakt. Das ist, das irritiert mich auch an E-Books.
The same thing irks me about e-books. There is no visible, physically verifiable sign of my reading progress.
Zeichen oder physisch sichtbare, wirksames Zeichen meines Lesefortschrittes gibt. Man muss zur neuen Grafik vielleicht anmerken, dass...
There's one thing I should probably point out about the journal New Graphic Design. It wasn't nearly as successful as the publishers had imagined and wished for.
Vorgestellt und gewünscht haben. Dass mag an einem gewissen
This may be due to a certain degree of dilettantism, or more specifically, due to a certain parochialism. Neither the publisher nor the editors really had any international experience.
Die Herausgeber hatten nicht wirklich internationale Erfahrung. Gleichzeitig kann man sagen,
At the same time, you could say that the movement, as it evolved, was absolutely elitist.
absolut elitär. Nicht? Das war also nicht das Prinzip der Verweigerung.
There was a principle of opposition. The Swiss style, the movement of new graphic design, was very much based on the refusal of what already existed.
Gründet eigentlich sehr, sehr stark auf der Verweigerung des Vorhandenen, des Bestehenden. Nicht? Also im Sinne, man definiert eher, was man nicht tut, als was man tut, als Voraussetzung.
You define what you won't do instead of what you will do as the basic premise for the new things that are to be created.
So kann man sagen, war es nicht so, dass man elitär sein wollte.
It's not that they set out to be elitist, but they wound up being elitist by token of their discussions on these matters inside their own circle.
Verhandlung des Gegenstandes. Interessanterweise war die Wirkung der Zeitschrift.
Interestingly enough, the effect of the journal was far greater than its circulation. That's a kind of comfort to me as a publisher today.
Dass wir zum Teil Bücher veröffentlicht haben, die
Some of the books we published have met with frighteningly little resonance in the big market, with very few copies sold. But they had enormous impact among connoisseurs or in academic circles.
Weitreichende Bedeutung und in Kennerkreisen oder auch in akademischen Kreisen. Und das scheint mir.
That's something to bear in mind, I think. In communication and in the media, it's not just the figures that determine the effect of the message.
Allein über die Wirkung der Botschaft entscheidet.